Good morning and welcome to ODNR's Spooky Series. I'm Alyssa Yapel and thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking all about the spooky things that happen at Malabar State Farm. So I want to introduce Rochelle, who is a naturalist at Wingfoot. Rochelle is going to be helping me with questions. So folks, I just want to point out the Q&A box, and if you have any questions, please do ask them. I will say that our program today includes a video, and so we will be holding most of the questions until the end. That shouldn't make you afraid to still ask them, because we will do our best to get to them during the show. So once again, please utilize the Q&A box. And I am going to pass it off in just a minute to Mark Summer, who is going to be telling our spooky story today. He's going to be talking about the cemetery at Malabar and the Seely Rose house. Seely Rose is a nice name, but was she a nice girl? I don't know. Mark will tell us, and he'll be telling us about Mr. Bromfield as well. So with that being said, Mark, I'm going to pass it to you to just introduce yourself and get the show started.
Okay. Well, thank you. Welcome. This is a new thing for me to talk this way and not to see the people in front of me, but we're always happy to share things here at Malabar. And one of the things that came with the park was a house on the property that back in 1896, the young lady did something to her family. She murdered them with poison. And it was just a couple years after somebody called Lizzie Borden did something similar. So for Ohio, this was a great big deal back there in 1896. So we're going to get ready to get started. We have a video to show you as we walked around and just shot places, kind of in a sequence of we go to the cemeteries first, we'll go to the houses, and then we'll be adding the stories over top of some of that as we do that. So hopefully follow along, and if you see a question, save it for the end like you said, and then we'll try to answer the best we can, because I like to tell people we always make up good answers here. So where do we start? How do we?
Hit play, just one click.
We're going to hit play now. Where's the play?
On the other screen.
On the other screen. Here I am looking.
Right there, just one time.
Okay, this is the entrance of Malabar Farm, if you were to visit us. And we had a beautiful day last Friday when we shot all this. And so this is the opening scenes of what you'd see. We're a 931-acre park with a lot of good walking around right now. Since we're not open for do our tours and do other things, people can come here and visit. So you're going to hear car noises in the background a lot. We had lots of visitors that day, like that. That's looking towards the big house and towards the farm part of it. Now we're over at Pleasant Valley Cemetery. It's just about a half a mile up the road from us. This is where some of the characters in this story are now found. The Rose family, the 3 people that Seely murdered, her family, and then people that were associated with it. But again, it was a beautiful valley here, and we're shooting some scenes as we turn around. It was the Pleasant Valley Lutheran Church. This is on the property of that. It's a little tiny place right next door to a Columbia Gas pumping station right now. As you can see, the leaves have started to change. It brought a lot of people in last week. But there's always the people that like to know about the ghost here too. So we're going to try to share some of our stories that relate to that. The paranormal is always an interesting activity for people, because some people experience it in different ways. Some people have no experiences, and some people have really wild experiences. But this is the small cemetery at the corner, right off the road, but at a corner of another road. And we're going to be focusing in on the Rose family grave. Let's see when that shows up here. Like that. But all the names in this cemetery are all from people in the valley. If you drive down the valley and see the, oh, here we are at the Rose family. It was his wife, or his David is the father. Rebecca was his wife. Walter was the brother of Seely. And here they are. David was a miller. He came to this part of Ohio from Union County, and he worked one of the last working water mills in Richland County. His wife was a weaver, and their son who came with them, he was kind of what they call a farm huckster. He went around and just got odd jobs at different farms. They had a daughter who was, when she came here, she was 12. Now she's 23 at this point, in the summer of 1896. And she was kind of, some people called her Simple Seely Rose. But Other people called her just lazy, like that. But this is where the parents were buried, and we'll tell you more of the story of how that all happened. We're going to try to focus on some of the other people that were related to the story. There was a boy involved, Guy Berry. I'm probably talking faster, so we're looking at other places. The gravestone is, there's the berries, and Guy was the boy involved who ran away from the valley when Seeley was kind of basically stalking him. So he ran away, and then he came back after she was safely incarcerated at the Lima State Mental Hospital. And so he lived a full life, as you can see from his tombstone there. But the Berries are a family that are well represented in this valley, and there's descendants of them now. We do have his parents' grave. They were part of it because they're the ones that went to Seeley's parents to tell her to quit bothering her son, their son, because he was really nervous. He'd go to work every day in his farm fields, and Seeley would be there. She would just be kind of laying on the fence or looking at him, or just kind of what they say, Google eyes at him like that. But she was best, as a 23-year-old, she best worked out at a one-room schoolhouse where she was still interacting with 5th and 6th graders. So that was kind of her mental age, probably, as we tell the story, and where she fit in best, until she discovered Guy. And she did that because other girls her age were starting to have boyfriends. This is the parents of Guy Berry, and they're the ones that went to her parents and said, please, he can't do his chores, he's not able to do things, he's afraid to come out of the house, because every time he does, there she was, standing there, almost like a puppy dog sometimes. But it was a little more dramatic than that, especially when she took it to the level that I want to get married, and we're going to get married, and he's proposed to me. Well, he really never ever proposed to her. All he did was say hi to her as she walked by on her way to school every day, because he was a good-natured, a good, friendly young man. And he was 18 years old, she was 23 years old, and he was certainly not that interested in her like that. But this stone shows the stones of the time, plus the newer stones that have been placed now, like that. There's one more character in here, or one more group of people that are going to be in the cemetery that we're going to show you. I guess we never know how long we take videos sometimes. Okay. The next families will be the Oilers, Jane and her husband, and they were friends of the Rose family. And here they are, Jane Oyler and her husband. And they were one of the few families that supported Seeley. They didn't believe that she could do this horrendous act. And people were out there wondering, because the valley got kind of divided, because it went almost 6 months before the sheriff really could figure out what had happened. Because with her simple-minded state, people didn't believe she could do it. Some people believed she could. So it was kind of a back and forth thing. And then the sheriff and the prosecutor were both up for re-election that year. So there was a lot of pressure on them to kind of get this case solved, because it was a quiet, peaceful valley, and all of a sudden, in a matter of a couple months, 3 people are dead right now. But this family took Seeley in for a while to kind of shield her away from all the controversy that was going on at that time, like that, until another young lady came and took her into her house. But we're going to speak to that when we get down to her house a little bit more, like that. The next cemetery that we're going to head down the road to is actually on the Malabar Farm property, and some people call it the Bromfield Cemetery, but actually it was called the Schrack Cemetery from the people that settled the valley, but now it's the Olivet Cemetery because it's part of the township, but it's on Malabar Farm property, and this is where the Bromfields are buried. They have some interesting history too, because another part of our haunted Malabar is that about in 2012, we were visited by the ghost hunters of the Sci-Fi Channel. They heard about Seeley Rose, and they came to do a story there. And they experienced stuff in the house that other people have had off and on, but they did it was on the TV for a while. So if you ever get old episodes of the ghost hunters, and they do show up every now and then, it was called The Family Plot. Now, they did admit our ghosts are not terrible ghosts. They're not afraid ghosts. They're just kind of there. They had sensitivity in their readings, that something's going on there, but not everybody feels it. But here's the cemetery. It's on a beautiful hilltop. It's been there for a long time. Actually, the first person in the cemetery was Sarah Schrack in 1820. She picked this spot because her two sons had two properties, and she wanted to be between them. She couldn't decide which one was more favorite. So halfway between what's now the Malabar Inn and the big house is this cemetery on a hilltop. And in the cemetery, the last people to be added there were the Bromfields. We have graves from him and his wife, Louis Bromfield, Mary Bromfield. His mom, dad, and his sister are also a part of this. But it's kind of we just added last year a stone denoting Bromfield's oldest daughter. Well, here's Mary's grave. She died 4 years before Mr. Bromfield. She was not happy here. She was a New York socialite, and they lived in New York, and they lived in Paris. And then he brings her to a place called Lucas, Ohio. It wasn't the most exciting place for her to be like that. And then the other stone will be Louis's stone. But at the foot of Mary's stone, we have his oldest daughter, who never married, Anne. And Anne was somebody who some people thought was a little different too. Anne was, I would say, by today's standards, we would call her autistic. But they did give her a classification called schizophrenic. And that kind of added some comments that were probably not so nice at that time period for her. But then her ashes were brought back to Malabar last year by one of her sisters. She died out in Montana, and she's buried out in Salt Lake City in 1990. So the last two Bromfield daughters had just passed away in the last couple of years. The last one just 2 years ago, Ellen, who lived in Brazil. But this was the oldest daughter who never married. The other two did marry and have families now. So now we can say that she's the next one here. And there's been some experiences in her bedroom. We're going to show you her bedroom later in this video. And I can attest to some people being on a tour having some uncomfortableness being in that room. And not like they were afraid of something, but more of a sadness, more of a kind of a way of and the room is blue, so I don't know if that adds to it or not like that also. Okay. This is Louis Bromfield, born in Mansfield, 1896. That's the only connection to Celia Rose he has. When he was born the same year that she did her activities. He made his fame and fortune as a writer living in France after being an ambulance driver in the First World War. When his first book was published successfully, he did marry this New York socialite. He got pretty good at being comfortable in that kind of lifestyle, but he always liked to say, I have one foot in the manure pile and another foot in the nightclub. Well, when his books got really successful, he goes to Paris between the war years. In those years, there's a lot of other people in France at the same time. People like Hemingway, people like Picasso, Fitzgerald. These are all people that he was a part of, and his writings were taking off. But it was the advent of World War II that brought him back to Richland County, where he remembered fond memories of a grandfather's farm, and he always wanted to have that farm. And now he could look at his mom and say, Mom, I can own a farm, I've got money. And so he did come back here in 1938 and purchased 3 properties. The properties have now become Malabar Farm. They came into state hands in 1972 and opened as a park in 1976. We call it Malabar Farm State Park. And you can come up here and visit like this. We're going to be heading to some other houses right now of some of the characters in our Celia Rose play. But first, there's some really nice views up here. I think we're going to show you first from this cemetery. We can see a place called Mount Gees, and Mount Gees is going to be. We're going to pan the other way first. It looks like, and as you can see, again, it was a really nice day to be doing filming like this. But some of these tombstones, the oldest one goes back to 1820, Sarah. And then all sorts of families. The Ferguson family is another one. They settled the valley here. So we have some names on our property, Ferguson Meadow, Ferguson Falls, of the people that were here, fur trapper. As we keep moving, we're going to be, now behind this this is where our cows hang out. We're still a working farm, so you can come here and see the nice big eyes looking at you, nice big brown-eyed cows. Usually on our wagon rides, this is one of our stops and we talk and we show this to people. We're going to be looking down the hill towards the working farm there. And some of the hay bales and some big rocks that were brought in to help shore up the creek. But now we're panning out over the fields here, the hay fields that that we actually farm and feed the animals with. The cornfields, they do practice the rotation of crops. Last year it was soybeans, this year it is corn. Now we're looking at, right in the middle of the screen is Mount Gees. You can drive up to the top of that and you can see cars up there. You might see little white shapes moving and you see a beautiful view of the valley. At Mount Gees is where Mr. Bromfield would talk about his farming practices. When he was here at Malabar, he kind of switched from his fictional writing to conservation. So about 20 years before the Earth Movement, he was doing that. We are now looking at a house on the property. It's called the Hostel House. It has been rebuilt since the Guy Berry lived there. His house was taken down, but it's in the same location. This was a 1911 Sears Roebuck catalog house, the plans for it, but it still belonged to the Berry family, and they rebuilt it. This is where Guy lived, and it's just across from our working farm, and not too far, probably less than 100 yards from Celie's house. We're going to try to pan to her house from here, but there's still lots of leaves on the tree. But between this house and her house, there was the watermill. The watermill was taken down after the Celie family, her property was at a sale to pay for their burials and stuff, that the mill was taken apart, and then Mr. Bromfield took some of the stones from the mill foundation and he put them into his gardens at the end of his house. We're now driving down the road. And we have a new bat house right up there. But if you kind of look right, we're going to cross over the bridge, and just up the stream, probably about 50 yards, is where the watermill sat. And then we're going to come into view of the Celie Rose house, where people have had experiences. Presently, the house is not open. We have had people live there. Before I started working here, people lived there, and they were part of the farm staff when Malabar had a bigger staff. And some of those people have had stories in that house, and the ghost hunters focused there when they were here on the house. So now we're coming into the driveway, the stream, and one of the fields right there, kind of looking where the mill would have sat back there. You can imagine a lot less trees. Now here's the house here. About 80% of the house is still original, and we're looking at the upstairs windows where Celie would have been looking out at her, or looking for her boyfriend Guy. The lower window you see right there was where her mom had a weaving mill, but that was her living room. On the other side of the house was a front porch that is now enclosed, and that is a more modern kitchen right now if you're to go in it. A couple times a year we do open the house up. We have something called a night haunt, and if you're into really kind of exploring the paranormal, it's from usually 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock in the morning, and we tell you the story of Celie Rose in its entirety in the house, sitting in there with the lights low. Then we take a wagon ride up to the cemetery we were just at. We have characters that share their stories at that cemetery, and then we come back and have a kind of a hot dog snack, and then we finish up the evening in Mr. Bromfield's house. We ask you to bring flashlights because we don't turn the lights on, and some people bring their ghost meters and they chat. But we're going to go inside the house just a little bit. It's still kind of got a more modern look to it, but it hasn't been used in a couple of years, other than we have a bunch of chairs there when we tell the story. So we're going to show you some posters we put on the wall that tell the story, and I'll try to go over the story with you as we do this part here. Let's see. Yeah, in 1896, that was the year Mr. Bromfield was born, and the family had already been there about 15 years. There's a picture of the mill on one side, and the town of Newville, which actually had to get moved when they built the Pleasant Hill Dam. They thought they'd flood the town, so they made everybody move, and then when they built the dam and flooded the town, it didn't happen. So people got to use the building stones, but this shows you the property lines. You can see the Ferguson homestead, the David Rose house. These are the locations of the different places. and Newville was just up the road and away from here. Where we're at, where the kitchen would have been in the house at that time, the Rose family, David was a Civil War veteran, but also a miller. Rebecca, his wife, was a weaver. Walter, they said he was a little different. The best he could do at work was probably just being a hired hand at the different farms in the valley like that. The day that he was poisoned, he actually went out to collect berries like that. The poisoning happened on that day, just about the end of June, I think June 24th, and Celie got up really early and made a breakfast for her family. She made it with cottage cheese and a big farm breakfast, and she did it because her family had just gotten on her case about bugging Guy Berry a lot. So her plan was she went over to the mill after she made the breakfast and brought back something called rough-on rats. It's kind of a poison that her dad used in the mill to share to get rid of the rodent problem. Here's the schoolhouse, a picture of the schoolhouse that she went to, and what we call the unrequited love, where she was bothering the berries, but no one else, he didn't respond to her in any way. He never led her on or anything like that. But that morning when she made the breakfast, there was something they ate. They were a German family, and something they had every morning was something called schmierkäse. If you're familiar with that, it's called cottage cheese to us today. There's a picture of the house from that time period. She mixed it in. It tells me that you can take this rough-on rats and it mixes it in very good into cottage cheese so you don't know it. It's got a sweet taste. I'm not going to find out. I don't want to find out because arsenic poisoning is not a great way to die like that. So yes, I was right. June 24th, 1896. She got up, she made breakfast, which was something very unusual for her. They all ate and then they went about their jobs. Her dad went across the stream to the mill. Her mom got at the loom, and her brother went up the Ferguson Road, as they called it then, and was collecting berries. And Celie went to her bedroom and waited. So some people wondered, could she really plan this, or was she really that diabolical about all this like that? But there's a picture of what the box looked like, the rough-on rats. And when the court case came up, one of the things they found out about was Celie made the comment, well, when my dad used the poison, the rats always came back. So it's kind of unusual. In her mind, she thought they were going to come alive again, but that didn't happen. Now the sheriff, how he finally got her to confess, and it took almost 6 months because there was a lot of controversy in the valley. Initially, her mom did not die in the first round of poisoning. Her mom got better, and then Celie repoisoned her mom after the funerals of her brother and her dad. And she did that because the mom suggested, we're going to be going back to Southern Ohio where there's family. So Celie was afraid that if she was not there, then her true love, Guy, would not be able to find her. So she repoisoned mom again. And mom, because in her weakened state, she didn't live quite as long. But what happened, the sheriff did, on here, there's a Tracy Douglas, there's a name at the one corner down here. She was a young lady that moved back to the valley, and she was in the town of Newville. She was about 20 years old, but she was a friend of Celie's from before. And the sheriff went to her and the prosecutor set her up with a story. We want you to tell Celie that we have you having boyfriend problems, but first take her in, get her confidence, and then tell her about your story. So it was a made up story. And after a couple months of being together, Celie did trust her enough to say, this is what I did. Now, the day they told the story, she had her reenact the story again later, but this time the sheriff was up in the loft of the building with the prosecutor. And while they were there, then they came down and said, they arrested her for the murder of her dad, like that. The trial was a big deal trial. Like I said, it was a couple years after in Massachusetts, the Lizzie Borden story. So it made news. They said when people showed up at the Mansfield courthouse, their buggies came all the way from Millersburg. It was just overflowing on the streets and the crowd. And they had people reenact the story, how Celie acted, her childlike ways. But eventually the trial found her innocent by reason of insanity. And then she was sent to a place in Toledo, Ohio. It was an asylum for evaluation. While she was up at that asylum for her evaluation, she was released accidentally, a paperwork error. She came back to the house. She made a few pies. She took the pies to the prosecutor, to Guy's family, and the pies they found out were poisoned later. The sheriff shows up again and said, we only tried you on one charge. So she went back willingly. They finished her processing, and then she was assigned to the Lima State Mental Hospital. She died in 1931. She was, I think, the age 62 when she died. Malabar has done a play about this. The last time they showed it was about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and the man that wrote the play actually has the locket that Celie wore while she was in prison. Here's a picture of the beams of the house. You can see the house has been covered over, but these are the actual beams of that part of the house that they would have lived in, happening like that. But when this playwright did the play, he would show the play in our barn. And when he shows the play in the barn, they always showed it at October time, and it kind of brought a lot of people out. But there were weird happenings. Lights wouldn't work. Speakers would go out. Doors would open and close during the play. They always felt it was Celie doing something, but it was kind of interesting what they did. They actually had kind of an impromptu seance one time. Celie, we're trying to tell you a story, and then things tended to get better. The man that wrote the play said like that. Oh, no. We hit escape. We're moving on to the next video.
Okay, hit the other time.
Which time?
Up to the top.
What side?
Okay.
Right there.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Mark, before you get started on that video, we had a question come in from Lynn, who is from Lucas County, or excuse me, Lucas, Ohio.
Okay,
And she asked, did the Roses have another daughter besides Celie? So
yes.
I didn't know if you had any information on that.
There's very little information about her. When they moved here, in the census, there was a daughter, Julia, but she was older and she stayed down in Union County. And that's all we know about her. She never moved with the family up here like that. There been a couple stories about the family. Brett Mitchell, that used to be a naturalist here, put together a lot of the newspaper articles, and it's reported in there, but nothing says, was she married, whatever she did, why didn't she come with the family? It was just kind of a blurb saying that they did have an older daughter that stayed down there.
Gotcha, thank you.
We're going to move on, it's okay? Here we go to the second part. Our phone died when we were filming this the first time.
Gotta love technology.
Yes. Well, now we're moving on to, that was Celie Rose and her things. We did, like I said, the ghost hunters were here. When they experienced the house, they went to Guy's house, they went to her house, and then they went to this house, Louis Bromfield's home. And this is actually where they found more energies, they said, like this. And we're going to highlight some of those energies that have happened in this house. And I can only relate a couple stories that I can say were firsthand. Most of them were for other guides and people that have worked here like this. But again, Louis Bromfield was born in Mansfield in 1896. He came back here. He took a 12-room house. So the house that you see on the left was the original farmhouse, and then he added 28 more rooms for what I call a simple remodel, total of 32 rooms in the house. And during the war years, because he was connected to Hollywood and a number of his books were made into movies, he got a lot of visits here because the train would come into Lucas. And the train was like I-71 in the airport, all wrapped into one. And movie stars like Shirley Temple, Jimmy Cagney, Joan Fontaine, Clark Gable, they were all visitors here. So if you visited the farm, you probably saw somebody famous doing chores, because Bromfield's favorite adage was, "Them's that eats works." They partied hardy, but they also did a lot. You hear the piano in the background right now. We had turned it on as we're going to go the front entrance of the foyer here. The one time I made the video. Okay. We're walking into the front foyer of the house. On the one side, you're going to see the door. This is the door that the ghost hunters said it was closed, but during their couple nights of investigations, that door seemed to open and close on them like that. Another highlight of the house is on the stairs you're looking at right now is where Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall got married in 1945. That brings a lot of people to our house too. And this part of the house they can actually rent to have a small wedding for about up to an hour. There's the piano that was a bribe to his wife. She did not want to come here. It's a 1939 Steinway, but it does have a device on it for people like me to be able to play it. I can push a button and it plays. It's a double staircase here, but we're going to be heading towards Mary's room right now, his wife. At the end of her life, she had a heart issue, and she was more invalid-like. So she pretty much stayed in this room, and some people have called it her sanctuary. You know, it wasn't Hollywood, it wasn't New York City, it wasn't Paris, France, it was Lucas, Ohio. We're going to be looking at the three daughters on the desk here that they had, and Mrs. Bromfield's brother is the picture above that. He was an aviator in the First World War that was killed during that time. The middle picture is her youngest daughter that just died about a year and a half ago. The girl on the, we're kind of losing her right there, but on the right side was the oldest one, Anne. We'll have some stories about her. Now this is a room that we tried, Mr. Bromfield made very French flavored. It has a marbled fireplace. It came from New Orleans, but it was French marble. And Mr. Bromfield moved out of this room when his wife, who slept almost 15 hours a day, he slept 2 to 3 hours a day. I believe he was ADHD sometimes. But people had experiences. When they walk into this room, some of the people have talked about smelling rose perfume. And especially one of the other naturalists that I trained with, he got a really strong smell. He came out of the bathroom through there to turn the lights off one night and like walked into this this perfume aurora around there like that. And it was a rose perfume. And that's been a story that's happened more than once. There's about 4 or 5 people that will confirm the story like that. But there's the bed she was in. She had a heart attack in 1950 and she passed away. She was the age 60 when she died. She died 4 years before Mr. Bromfield did. He died in 1956. So some people, that's the original carpeting on the floor, and we do have some nice dog stains. Bromfield had a lot of dogs in the house and they could do whatever they wanted like that. The headboard there has all of his bestsellers on it. But some people, you know, they, like I say, they had some meters in this room and they just felt some, what they called it quiet energies. I'm not sure what that exactly means. But most of the room is still very in the French flavored. The initials on the bed are for Mary Appleton Bromfield down there. Okay. Those are all of his bestsellers. But his later books are now being revisited quite a bit because of their ecology bent and taking care of the world a little bit better. So they just had a book come out this year about Louis Bromfield, The Life of a Planter, and it's getting some attention. It made the New York Times. It was on their list of books. Lots of windows in the house because they didn't have very good light. So the house is really, that would have been their cooling system too, and they opened up the windows. Though presently the house is air conditioned and cool when it's open again. Hopefully next year we'll be open and back up for tours again. And then maybe you can come and experience something at our house. We're going to be going into Mr. Bromfield's office next. Walking through their shared bathroom here. This was his library and his writing room, and it became his bedroom too when he and his wife were not, when she got more of the rest, needed more rest. We're looking at a dog door down there in the lower corner behind the red couch and that. And the dogs that he had, over 70 dogs in 15 years. But the dogs are an active part of it. I've had some people tell me on when they've been walking through the house as a group of 30 people usually, that they feel like dogs are running past them. Again, I haven't felt in that, but one lady was very insistent. His dogs were kind of bumping in there, kind of nuzzle them in lower parts of their body like that. That was his writing table. He built a very beautiful desk we're going to see in just a little bit, but his desk was too tall to type at it, so he would do the typing at this. But I also like to think he liked to look out the windows, and that typewriter was also portable enough he could go outside and type. It says he sometimes sat near the corn and typed and talked it that way. There's a scene from inside that same window, but you're always going to see a dog in the pictures. So we've got ghost dogs in the house too. The collection of books in the house is almost 3,900 books related to his books in there, the books he read. Also, a lot of, if you were a guest there, you didn't have really radio or TV to watch, so there was lots of books to read, like that. Looking at a couple of awards there, he got an award for growing cabbages in France, and his Pulitzer Prize is up on the wall. But you heard more about growing cabbages. The bay window there is how the desk came in. The desk was quite large in 3 sections like that. Now, right where you're looking at the flag there, one of our kind of interesting stories from the person that trained me, Sybil Bursky, she was giving the tour. She was standing about where the head is in the picture there. And after the tour was over, towards the end of it, a mother came up with her son, and the son asked her a question. Why was there a man standing there by the flag? He had a flannel shirt on and blue jeans. And Sybil went, well, there was nobody there. Somebody that we call Mr. Bromfield. The little boy had some sensitivity, they said. He had 2 sisters killed in a very horrible accident when a gas line explosion at an Isley restaurant in eastern Ohio. And the boy has always been in tune to seeing the sisters or seeing people. And so when he was in the room, this is where the audience stood on this side over here, and that he saw Mr. Bromfield just kind of with his arms crossed, shaking his head like, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, like that. Mr. Bromfield's favorite dog was at the foot of his bed, and there's some more of the books that are in that room there like that. The next room that we're going to go through, we're not going to do the whole house today. We're just going to do the places where some people have had experiences. But this is the room the ghost hunters were sitting in when they heard the front door open and close. And then they ran there. This was his class picture from Mansfield Senior High, the class of 1914. He's on the left side, the second row down, the 3rd person in. I'm going to point to it, but that won't do me any good for you. I guess she's focusing on his picture there. You can kind of catch it before it freezes too long. It says Bromfield. His name was actually changed to Bromfield because it got misspelled so often. He kept it that way. He liked that spelling better than Bromfield. He also changed his first name from Louis, L-E-W-I-S, to Louis the French way, L-O-U-I-S, like that. He really fell in love with France. I believe he would have stayed in France if it hadn't been for the advent of World War II. But luckily for us, we have dog bones in there because they say the ghost dogs kind of come and enjoy them sometimes. But his favorite dog, Prince, was in that location there. And he was the boss dog. And when Prince passed away, Mr. Bromfield wrote an obituary. He thought a child had died. There have been some stories of hearing people walk in this part of the house. If they've been in the basement, they hear like noises upstairs. There is a basement under this that has a game room and that. But it is an older home too. But I'm not going to say that we don't have Mr. Bromfield walking around at night sometimes. Here's a picture that you see here that somebody had took outside the window, and in it, if you can look at it carefully, they saw an image of a dog because it was into the window going in through towards Mary's room to his office. Right in the middle, there's kind of a dot and 2 white eyes there and kind of like pointed ears. So kind of like a boxer. One of the men that did the decorating in the house, J.R. Reynolds, not only did he do decorating on Broadway and decorated the house for Mr. Bromfield, he and also was very much into racing horses. He did a collection of ghost stories from around the country. And that's a book that we have there. So if you've got a good imagination, you can see the door open there and the shadow of the dog there. But no one was in the house at the time. He was outside the front door or outside the window looking in there at that point. So it's a picture we like to share with people. We're heading upstairs now, and we're going into the girls' sitting room. And we're going to highlight Anne's room, his oldest daughter. the one that never married, the one that I think was autistic, but they called her schizophrenic. She was with Mr. Bromfield when he died, and then she was taken in by some friends of the family until she went to live with her sister in Montana. And this is the sitting room the girls had. But when I was on a tour, we usually talk about the room here and what they're doing, and then we walk into the bedrooms and take a look at them. It's kind of neat. Each daughter had her own bedroom off of this, but as we walked through this room after the tour was over, one of the women came up to me on the side in a very quiet way and said, when I walked through that room, I just got a very cold feeling through my body, and it was a sad feeling like that. And they said Anne was a little different. When there were thunderstorms, she would wear a nightgown and with a robe and go out on the front porch and watch the storms go across the valley like that. We're going to show you some of Anne's artwork. That was all the girls did some kind of artwork. Mr. Bromfield was quite an amateur painter himself. But as we look at those pictures, you can kind of make a decision on kind of an unusualness or a strangeness when people look at it. When the ghost hunters were here, we're highlighting that one. She called it the fire demon, like that. But when they set their devices up right on that desk there, they put some flashlights there. Someone sat on the windowsill over here, and as they asked the room questions, the flashlights were answering the questions to them. And that was a highlight of when they did their episode on us, called The Family Plot with the Ghost Hunters. And I can't believe that was 2020 when that episode aired. I've caught it a couple times, and I had it on DVR, and then everything went out and I lost it. So I'm hoping they show it again so I can re-DVR it again. This was another daughter's room, Hope, the daughter where Anne was living with when she passed away out in Montana. Oh no, excuse me, we're back in Anne's room from the other direction now, I'm sorry. I think we're getting close to winding up our time. I haven't been looking at the total time, but this was the last set of rooms we were going to show. We're going to show you some of Anne's pictures now, or a couple of them. She did a series of 13 face drawings, but this one called the Fire Demon kind of gets attention because where it's hanging. A lot of books. Every room in the house is like you're walking into a library, but they were well read. Like I said, almost 3,900 books. This is some pictures of their house in France. We've been having a lot of our artwork get reconditioned by a place in Cleveland called ICA. It's been a neat project. The picture on top of the dresser was something behind another picture that they found. We're not sure of the initials. We just said there's just the word Bromfield that's on them. So one of the Bromfields did the pictures. But that's the desk where they put the flashlights, and the flashlights will answer questions. There's The Fire Demon by Anne Bromfield. Bromfield had her in a numerous set of schools. I would say she was probably homeschooled because her nanny was very good at that. But Hathaway Brown in Cleveland was one of the schools he also had her in too. We have some yearbooks from that time. And
Mark, we have a question. How old was Annie when she died?
when Anne died, she was, I believe she was 74 when she died. She was in Montana. She was buried on the property out there of the middle sister, Hope. They had a farm in Montana outside the capital of Helena, and she was buried on the property. But a couple years ago, after Hope died, the family property was being divested, and one of the grandkids brought her. They found her ashes and brought her here, like that. And they had a quiet moment on the property somewhere where Annie's back. There's a picture of Anne right there. When you see a lot of the pictures of her in the house, she's not in usually a group picture with the family. There's just a couple pictures with her with her sisters, but most of the time she's by herself. And they said that was typical of her. And having worked with autistic kids, sometimes they're not people that like to get their picture taken sometimes. She looks most like her mom. Very bright young lady. She actually could do work for her. There's another photograph of her. And she was able to work at the home, work out of the home. Mr. Bromfield was able to work with her. Kind of in the front yard of the big house now, where she'd like to stand and watch the thunderstorms. You see, it would be a good place to watch the storms go by.
And I have a couple questions that we'll ask when the video wraps up here, but I do just want to remind our viewers, if you have any questions, now's going to be the time to ask, so please utilize the Q&A, and we will try and get to all of your questions before we wrap up today.
Well, we're ready. Thank you for your attention. At the end of the video.
And okay, did you have some pictures that you wanted to?
I have some pictures of some of the people that we have. In this picture here, this is Tracy Douglas, the girl that made friends with and got the confession out of it. This was the prosecutor there, Prosecutor Douglas.
Tracy Davis, was it, Mark?
Tracy Davis. You see that? I'm trying to hold it the right way.
I only knew that because you had it labeled.
Okay, down here, this is Celia's grave on the grounds of where they call it an asylum at the time, but it was a state mental hospital. It was taken down, and there's a new state prison there, but there is the graveyard from prisoners that didn't have family to come and get them. So this is what Celia's grave is like. And the man that wrote the play, when he went to visit it, it was on a cloudy, stormy day, but the day they got to the grave, he said, the clouds, it quit raining, the cloud opened up, and there was a little bit of sunlight shining on it. So he adds that to his stories. And when he got that locket from her too, over there. This is a picture of what the watermill looked like. That was between the property. A lot of the trees have since come back then. This is the town of Newville that's no longer there. It's just a crossroads. There's a few houses there like that. Again, this is a picture of Cecilia there that the young man saw. Over here is her brother down here. Oops, down there where I'm pointing to it. Her mother, Rebecca, and then her father, David. One of the neat stories in the house when the ghost hunters were here, one of the farm families that worked here at Malabar Farm, the house had been remodeled a little bit, but the mom was in the kitchen working, and he was in the TV room. He was a little boy of about 7 years old, watching TV, or so the mom thought. And she hears him talking. So she walks into the room, the TV is off, and he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm talking to the lady in the long dress in the corner there." And so that's the kind of the story that gets, when you tell that story, a lot of people start to get the little chills on their body like that, because her bedroom was upstairs. They say she's still back there, so we like to tease some of the guests when we're on a wagon ride. You know, she's looking for a boyfriend, so all you guys kind of look out right now. Any other questions?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with Juanita, who, or excuse me, I may have mispronounced that, maybe Juanetta. Why is the park or the area called Malabar now? So was it originally Malabar, Mark, and then we assumed the name, the state assumed the name when it became a state park?
When Bromfield put his 3 farms together, he put eventually 4 farms together, called it Malabar. It was named after the southwest coast of India. The southwest coast of India is called the Malabar Coast. While he lived in France, he visited India about 3 times in 18 months and traveled there, was a guest of what they have, their local governors. Their governors were called Maharajas. So he went on a hunting trip one time. He went on a kind of a vacation with him and his wife, but he said that part of India reminded him of southern Richland County. So that, and Malabar does mean gentle hills and valleys like that. So if you come down here and stand on the hill, you'll see it. This is where the glacier stopped. So this is where the hills of the Appalachians kind of begin. I like to tell people.
Awesome. And we have Parker and Porter, who are 11 years old, joining us today. Thanks for coming, Parker and Porter. And they asked, when was the house made, or when was it built?
Which house?
I'm not sure that. Let's go with both of them.
Okay. Well, the Sealy Rose house was built in the late 1800s. the Sealy Rose moved into it back in 1880. So before that, around 1850 or so, it was an old track house there, but it's been added onto, and it's still on park property. Like I said, it was used for housing for up to the staff, and that was back up until the 90s, I believe, when they had a bigger staff here. The big house was a 12-room farmhouse built in 1870, and then after Bromfield bought it, between 1938 and 41, he added 28 more rooms to the 4 rooms he kept. So a total of 32 rooms in the big house, 10 bathrooms, 10 bedrooms, and lots of partying.
And we have a couple questions on when somebody asked, will the home be available for ghost investigations again? And then we had somebody else, Beth had asked, is it open to the public? So I know coronavirus has affected the hours of the park. Is that right, Mark?
The park is open for property to walk around and hike around like other state parks. Lots of neat things to do outside. We have hiking trails. We have a cave on the property. We have animals that can be visited. But as far as the physical inside of the house and the wagon rides, those are on hold until we feel like it's a safer way to do that, like that. The first question was, is the house park open for ghost hunting? That's kind of like a private event. You can't like having a wedding. If you contact our park manager, Jenny Rohr, they can make decisions on that. They have been usually for a couple hours in the evening. Usually, some people, like the last time I sat with a group, it was from like 9 o'clock till 2 o'clock in the morning that they could do that. But there is a fee for that. I'm not sure if it's a standard fee or it's a fee that they set based on our time that we're here. But yes, they can do things like that. Plus, we had 3 night haunts last year where we go through those places, and you can sign up for it, and then we do the night haunt as a park activity. Does that help?
And are the night haunts, are they off this year because of coronavirus?
Yeah, we never even got one this year. We didn't even get our first one in this year because in March it happened. But usually we start somewhere probably May, and then we have one in the middle of summer, and then we try to do one at Halloween time.
Okay. Parker and Porter had also asked about any tours coming up. So unfortunately not this year, but keep an eye out for next year, hopefully.
Because we're at the whim of when they say yes, and so far everything through November is still closed. We do have some Christmas tours, but we're going to assume if things don't get better, we're not going to have them probably.
Okay. And we have an interesting comment and question from Erwin. Thank you for joining us. He said that Lewis had a teenage boy from France come to the farm each summer in the 1950s, and his father, Walter, tutored him in English when he came to visit. Do you happen to know the name of the boy, Mark?
No, I do not know. I knew Bromfield took in young men from overseas after the war to share farming practices, and he would put them up. He also took in a family. I'm trying to think of the lady's name. She was in France. Oh, shoot. He had 2 sons. They went to the Hudson Academy in Ohio, and Bromfield kind of was put down as kind of not their father, but as the person who would take care of them. And we have pictures of them sitting on a desk in there with the word Hudson, Ohio on it. But I'm not sure the names are, I have them somewhere in my notes like that. But he was, he raised them because the mother was kind of to be a little impolite. Bromfield called her white trash only because she married rich and she flitted around the world. But her husband stayed in France and was taken during the Holocaust time, like that, because they were Jewish. He was Jewish. But the boys he raised, and we know the one boy died on a mountain climbing accident. But I'm not sure if they're the same boys because he didn't have his own sons, but he did take boys in like that, show them farming, and they would come and stay with him like that. But yeah, I'd have to look that up. That's a good question. That's sure. We learn a lot from people sharing with us, and then we start digging a little deeper, and we maybe find something.
Yeah, that's cool family history from Erwin there. And we have Lynn from Lucas, Ohio. She said there's a Native American burial ground on Malabar Farm. Mark, would you be willing to share some information on that quickly?
Okay, we have when Mr. Bromfield bought the properties, he had a neighbor, Mr. Pugh. And Mr. Pugh had built a home up there out of old telephone poles because he worked for the power company. And as he was putting in what we call a summer kitchen, a way to cook outside, there was a huge, huge boulder. And if you come here to see it, you'll see this building with a boulder on one end. And it's big. I mean, it would take 5 or 6 of me to reach around it. Well, as Mr. Pugh was getting ready to blow it up, he was going to move it so he could put his wall in. He uncovered bones. And he discovered that the bones were just not recent. They went back a ways. And so he properly put them back in there and reconsecrated that. I mean, had something done. And so we attribute that. We call them Native American bones from when the early Native Americans were here. So that's kind of a highlight. You're right. And because of that, there are some, I won't say necessarily superstitions, but some beliefs around that says, you know, Richland County got its name because it was a rich land and the Native Americans shared it as a hunting land. There are other places in Ohio, Flint Ridge is one of them, that there would be no fighting going on there, but they would share the resources there. And Richland County was one of the places that they would share. And there were sites all the way from northern Richland County to here, but Richland County necessarily isn't the same shape. This area was called Rich Land, and that's how Richland County got its name. I hope that helps.
Yeah, so we are getting close to time, but we have one last question I want to make sure we get in, unless anybody else has some, write them now before we have to wrap up. But somebody asked, did Celie die from natural causes or did she become ill?
The only thing we have notes that she died of, she was in her middle 60s, which at that time period wasn't unusual. And, you know, maybe the health care wasn't the greatest, and then it could have been a cold or something. But yeah, we just said she died of, they said, I think it says natural causes.
Okay. Okay, sorry, I thought we had one last question, but Lynn was just saying this was fascinating and giving us praise. So thank you, Lynn, for that. And so I think we are going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, Mark, for your expertise and awesome storytelling, and Rochelle in the background for helping moderate today. And thanks to our viewers. If you want to join any of our future webinars in the Haunted series, we have a couple more things coming up this month. So next week, same time, same place, 10 a.m. next Wednesday, we are going to be doing a not so spooky series on bats. I think they're adorable, but not everybody does. So please join us for that one. And then also we are going to be having a special, it will be posted on our Facebook page within the next couple of days on Sasquatch. That's going to be I think October 30th. It's a Friday, so keep an eye out for that. John Hickenbottom, our naturalist from Salt Fork State Park, is going to be telling us all that he knows about Bigfoot in Ohio. So thanks again for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.